Okay, so you want to understand Holden Caulfield?
Really get inside his head.
Yeah, not just, the plot of The Catcher in the Rye, but like what makes him tick?
Right.
Why he still resonates with readers today.
Yeah, he's a puzzle, isn't he? It's
Well,
like a whirlwind of contradictions.
totally. I mean,
Cynical but vulnerable.
judgmental, but also like yearning for connection.
Yeah.
So he's at this fancy prep school
Pencey Prep.
right before Christmas break.
About to get the boot.
But there's so much more going on beneath the surface,
Oh,
right?
yeah, definitely.
It's like his expulsion is just a symptom of this like deeper unease.
It's really interesting how Salinger sets the stage, like post-World War II America, supposed prosperity and conformity.
Yeah.
But Holden's rebelling against all that.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder if Salinger is commenting on something bigger there.
A deeper societal malaise.
Yeah, like a spiritual emptiness kind of thing.
And the way he tells his story,
Oh,
it's
wait.
like you're trapped in his head.
First person, all the way.
Experiencing the world through this cynical, often hilarious filter. Like that whole rant about phonies. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, classic Holden.
Mr. Haas, the headmaster, shaking hands with parents based on their wealth and status. Holden just tears them apart.
It's easy to dismiss that as teenage angst, but I think there's something deeper there.
Okay, what do you think?
A fear of losing yourself in a world that values appearances over authenticity. Haven't we all felt that pressure to conform at some point to fit in?
Oh, totally.
Even if it means sacrificing a part of ourselves.
Well, and with Holden, it's almost an obsession.
True.
Like when he keeps talking about leaving Elkton Hills as old school or running away from Pencey goodbyes, really seemed to shake him.
That's where the past trauma comes in.
Okay.
Remember his younger brother, Allie?
Yeah.
Who died of leukemia?
It's haunting him.
It haunts him, leaving him with this deep fear of change and the unknown. Like he's constantly trying to hold on to the past freeze time because moving forward means facing the possibility of more pain and loss.
Right. And that incredibly vivid memory. He keeps going back to the football game with his friends as the light fades.
Oh, yeah.
It's so poignant.
He's clinging to that memory because it represents a time of innocence.
Before
Allie's death shattered his world.
Yeah.
And it's that inability to let go of the past that fuels his obsession with Jane Gallagher.
Right.
She becomes the symbol of everything he's lost.
Right. Jane is way more than just a crush for Holden.
Oh, yeah. He practically idolizes her.
Especially compared to someone like Stradlater, his roommate.
Ugh, Stradlater, the epitome of superficiality.
Exactly.
Remember how Holden describes their dates?
Yeah.
Stradlater just sees Jane as a conquest. But Holden cherishes these small, specific memories like playing checkers.
Yeah. Her refusal to move her kings.
Exactly. Even the details of her troubled family life.
It's almost heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jane represents this pure, authentic connection that Holden desperately craves but can't seem to find in the present.
It makes you wonder, is he really in love with Jane? Or is he in love with the idea of her, with the innocence she represents? Could it be that he's projecting his own longing for a simpler time onto her?
That's a really good point. It's like he's put her on this pedestal, this symbol of everything good and pure that he feels is slipping away.
Right.
And then he finds out Stradlater went on a date with her.
And that just sends him spiraling.
Right. His impulsive trip to New York, that disastrous encounter with the three women at the Lavender Room.
It all stems from this deep-seated fear of losing something precious, something he can't quite define.
Let's talk about that Lavender Room scene. I mean, what was that all about?
Yeah.
He seemed so out of his element, almost repulsed by these women who are just trying to have a good time.
It's like he's looking for authenticity in all the wrong places. He expects to find it in this sophisticated nightclub. But instead, he's confronted with what he perceives as phoniness and superficiality.
Right.
It just reinforces his disillusionment with the adult world.
And then the failed date with Sally Hayes. It's the same pattern, isn't it?
Yeah, he builds her up in his mind, hoping she'll be different, someone who understands him. But Sally represents the very world he's rebelling against.
Yeah.
She's concerned with appearances, social status, fitting in everything Holden despises.
So, of course, the date implodes.
Predictably.
It's like he's setting himself up for disappointment. He craves connection.
Right.
But he pushes away anyone who doesn't fit his idealized vision of what that connection should look like.
Which brings us to one of the most fascinating contradictions in Holden's character.
Okay.
On the one hand, he's terrified of change, of growing up. But on the other hand, he desperately wants to find his place in the world to make a meaningful connection.
It's like he's caught in this tug of war.
Yeah.
Between his desire for innocence and the inevitability of adulthood.
Exactly.
And that tension is really at the heart of his obsession with the Museum of Natural History and those ducks in Central Park.
Two sides of the same coin. Those two things represent the poles of his internal struggle.
Okay.
The museum with its static exhibits embodies a world frozen in time.
Yeah.
It's a place where nothing changes, a place where Allie is still alive in his memory.
And the ducks disappearing and reappearing with the changing seasons.
They represent the natural cycle of life and death, the inevitability of change that Holden so desperately wants to resist. He keeps asking where they go in the winter, hoping someone can give him a definitive answer.
Yeah.
Because that would mean there's a predictable order to the universe.
Right.
That even loss has a place in the grand scheme of things.
But no one can give him that answer.
Nope.
He's left with this nagging uncertainty, this fear that everything he holds dear will eventually vanish.
And that fear drives him further into isolation, further into despair.
It's a fear many of us can relate to.
Oh, absolutely.
Who hasn't felt that anxiety about the future, that sense of uncertainty about where life is taking us.
Right, but for Holden, it's amplified by his grief, by this feeling that the world is a chaotic and unpredictable place where innocence is always under threat.
Which is why he latches onto the idea of being the catcher in the rye, right?
Yeah, saving kids from falling off the cliff of adulthood, preserving their innocence. It's a beautiful but ultimately futile fantasy.
Yeah.
You can't shield people from the realities of life, from the pain and disappointment that comes with growing up.
And that's the tragedy of Holden Caulfield.
Yeah.
He's so focused on protecting others from the fall that he doesn't realize he's the one teetering on the edge.
Which brings us to his late-night visit to Mr. Antolini, his former teacher. He's seeking guidance, a lifeline.
Yeah, but what he gets is a cryptic warning about a terrible fall.
Right, and that scene is so ambiguous.
It really is. Is Mr. Antolini genuinely concerned about Holden's well-being?
Or is there something more sinister at play?
It's one of those moments that leaves you questioning everything you thought you knew about the characters.
It's a testament to Salinger's brilliance as a writer. He doesn't give us easy answers. He forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, about the complexities of adult relationships.
And about the fine line between concern and manipulation.
Exactly.
It's almost as if Salinger is saying, look, growing up is messy.
Yeah.
It's full of contradictions, uncertainties, and moments where you just don't know who to trust.
And that's what makes Holden's journey so compelling. He's not a hero. He's not a villain. He's just a deeply flawed, deeply human character trying to find his way in a world that can feel both terrifying and exhilarating.
He's a reflection of our own adolescent anxieties, our own struggles to make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and unfair.
Yeah.
And his story, while set in a very specific time and place, speaks to something universal about the human experience.
Definitely.
The search for meaning, the yearning for connection, and the struggle to hold on to hope in the face of despair.
Absolutely.
And that vulnerability.
Yeah, that raw honesty.
That's what makes Holden such a relatable character. He's not afraid to show his flaws, his insecurities, his moments of utter despair.
He's giving us permission to feel those things, too.
Yeah.
To acknowledge that growing up isn't always pretty.
Right.
That it's okay to feel lost and confused sometimes.
And then there's that whole question of what really happened with Mr. Antolini.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a pivotal moment in the book. And yet, Salinger leaves it open to interpretation.
Yeah. Does he ever?
I mean, was Mr. Antolini really making a pass at Holden?
Or was Holden just misinterpreting his actions?
It's tough to say.
That ambiguity is deliberate. It forces us to confront our own biases, our own assumptions about adult relationships.
Right.
It also highlights Holden's state of mind at that point.
Yeah, he's so desperate for guidance, for someone to tell him what to do.
Exactly.
That he's almost willing to believe the worst about Mr. Antolini.
He's looking for a reason to run, isn't he?
He's already convinced the world is full of phonies, and this just confirmed his suspicions.
It also speaks to the power dynamics at play, you know?
Okay.
Holden is vulnerable both emotionally and literally. He's crashing on Mr. Antolini's couch, seeking refuge from the storm raging inside him.
Right.
And Mr. Antolini, whether intentionally or not, takes advantage of that vulnerability.
It makes you think about how easily trust can be broken.
Especially when you're young and looking for someone to guide you.
Exactly. And it raises questions about the responsibility adults have towards young people,
Absolutely.
about the importance of recognizing and respecting boundaries, even in moments of emotional intensity.
So Holden flees once again,
He's back on the streets of New York.
this time feeling even more alone, even more alienated from the world around him,
He wanders aimlessly.
trying to escape his own thoughts, his own fears.
It's a classic descent into despair.
He tries to distract himself going to the movies, trying to reconnect with old friends.
But nothing seems to work.
Nope. He's like a ghost haunting his own life, unable to find a place where he truly belongs.
That scene at the lagoon where he imagines himself disappearing,
Heartbreaking.
he's literally coming undone.
Yeah.
And the only thing that seems to keep him tethered to reality is the thought of his little sister Phoebe.
It's a powerful reminder of the importance of human connection, especially in moments of crisis.
Phoebe represents everything that's good and pure in Holden's world.
Right. She's the one person who sees through his cynicism and loves him unconditionally.
And she's the only person he feels comfortable being truly vulnerable with.
He goes to her school, leaves her a note, and waits for her to meet him at the museum.
It's a desperate attempt to recapture a sense of innocence.
Yeah.
To connect with a part of himself that hasn't been completely tainted by his experiences with the adult world.
And then that beautiful, heartbreaking scene where he watches Phoebe go around and around on the carousel.
So much emotion in that scene.
He's so happy in that moment, so present, so fully engaged in the simple joy of watching his sister experience something she loves. It's a fleeting glimpse of peace amidst all the chaos and turmoil of his inner world.
And it's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there are still moments of beauty, moments of grace that can sustain us.
But that moment can't last forever.
No.
Holden knows he can't stay with Phoebe, that he has to face the consequences of his actions,
Right.
that he can't keep running away from his problem.
He gives her his red hunting hat.
That symbol of his individuality, his attempt to stand apart from the crowd.
And then he disappears into the crowd, leaving us to wonder what becomes of him.
That ending is both hopeful and ambiguous. It suggests that Holden is finally ready to confront his demons, to take responsibility for his life.
Yeah.
But it also leaves us with a sense of unease.
A nagging doubt about whether he'll be able to overcome the darkness that threatens to consume him.
And that's the genius of Salinger's writing. He doesn't tie everything up in a neat little bow.
He leaves us with questions, with uncertainties, with a sense of longing for resolution that mirrors Holden's own yearning for peace.
And that's why The Catcher in the Rye continues to resonate with readers decades after its publication.
Yeah.
It's a story that challenges us to confront the complexities of adolescence, the messiness of human relationships, and the enduring power of hope, even in the face of despair.
It's interesting how Salinger bookends the story, with Holden reflecting on everything.
Yeah, like he's trying to make sense of it all.
Right, just as we are as readers.
And that distance he creates, narrating from some point in the future, makes you wonder how much his perception has changed.
Right, like, is he still as cynical? Or has he found some peace with the phony world?
Because throughout the book, he's constantly searching for something authentic, something real.
Yeah.
He's drawn to those unchanging exhibits in the museum. Like, he wants to freeze time and hold on to that sense of innocence.
Yeah, like he wants to be in the museum.
Forever.
Forever.
Exactly. It reminds me of how we all cling to certain memories, those snapshots of a simpler time.
Yeah.
Maybe even idealizing them a bit.
Totally.
Do you ever find yourself doing that?
Oh, all the time.
Looking back on the past with a sort of wistful longing?
Absolutely. It's so easy to get caught up in nostalgia.
Yeah.
But then you remember those ducks in Central Park, the ones Holden's so fixated on?
Oh yeah, the ducks.
They represent the reality that everything changes, that time marches on whether we like it or not.
And maybe that's what Salinger's trying to tell us. That accepting change, embracing the uncertainties of life,
Is part of growing up?
you can't be the catcher in the rye forever.
It's like Holden's trying to protect everyone else from the fall, but he's the one who needs saving.
Perhaps, but don't we all need saving in some way?
That's true.
Don't we all struggle with those feelings of inadequacy, of not being good enough, of fearing the future?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just that Holden's inner turmoil is so raw, so exposed.
Yeah.
He makes you question everything. Societal expectations, adult behavior, even your own definition of phony.
And maybe that's why The Catcher in the Rye remains so powerful. It holds up a mirror to our own anxieties, our own struggles to find our place in a world that doesn't always make sense.
So after this deep dive into Holden's world, what do we make of him?
Yeah, is he a tragic hero, a cautionary tale, Or just a kid trying to make sense of a world that feels increasingly hostile?
I mean, I think he's all of those things.
I think so, too.
He's a symbol of youthful idealism clashing with the harsh realities of adulthood.
He's a reminder that even the most cynical among us can be capable of great love and tenderness.
And ultimately, he's a character who forces us to ask ourselves some hard questions.
Yeah, about our own values, our own fears, and our own definitions of authenticity.
So if Holden Caulfield were here today, I wonder what he'd make of our world.
Would he see us all as phonies, glued to our screens, obsessed with appearances?
Or would he find glimmers of hope, those genuine connections that he was so desperately searching for?
Perhaps he'd find solace in those who dare to question, to challenge the status quo, to seek out authenticity in a world that often rewards conformity.
Well, that's something to think about, isn't it? As we wrap up this deep dive into the world of Holden Caulfield, we leave you with this. If you were to offer him some advice, what would you say, and more importantly, what would his story teach you about navigating the complexities of your own life?